We thank His Excellency and Ali for those elucidating insights. And we are ready to start our next riveting fireside chat. It will be featuring Karim Khan, prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, and Bobby Ghosh, editor at Bloomberg. This session will focus on accountability for perpetrators of ISIS crimes, which remain low in many countries, even as evidence of ISIS's atrocities continues to mount. The prosecution of terrorists at the international level remains a complex challenge, and this session will reflect on some important progress made and challenges remaining in this field. Over to you, Bobby.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. As you just heard, my guest at for this fireside conversation without a fire is Karim Khan, QC. He's the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. And I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since it was planned. We are going to talk about accountability and bringing international terrorists to justice, and his role both in his current position at the ICC and his previous experiences in Iraq in trying to bring accountability to the crimes committed by ISIS and Daesh. I'm going to start, Karim, by asking you a somewhat philosophical question. Is it really the ICC's job to prosecute terrorism cases, or is that something better done by individual countries where these crimes are committed?
Well, firstly, it's a delight to have a chat with you, Bobby. In terms of the question, the job of the ICC and the job of the prosecutor is to prosecute effectively, independently and impartially crimes within its jurisdiction. Now, one thing is clear, that given the terrorism we've seen around the world, whether it is Ansar Deen in Mali, whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab, whether it is Daesh or ISIS Khorasan, this nature of transnational crime has a unique phenomena that can also constitute crimes against humanity or genocide, and can also entail the commission of war crimes. So the job of the court is to prosecute different types of conduct that constitute those core international crimes. And there's no question about it that these types of terrorist acts that I've mentioned can clearly constitute the types of crimes that are within the court's jurisdiction.
Okay, then I'll ask you the logical follow-up question. If the first question was, should these crimes be prosecuted by the ICC? The next question is, can they be prosecuted by the ICC? There are obviously enormous logistical, practical hurdles. There are reasons why individual countries struggle to bring these people to justice. What special tools do you have at your disposal that will allow you to go where those individual governments cannot?
Well, the first part is this, that the court can do, the office can do that which the statute permits. Now, the ICC is a court of last resort. Putting the ICC to one side, there are international prohibitions under existing customary international law and by dint of numerous conventions that prohibit various criminal conduct. For example, prohibition against torture, the customary nature of the Nuremberg principles. We have, this year, the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg principles. Yeah. 1948, we had the Genocide Convention. These give universal jurisdiction and indeed affirmative obligations upon states to prosecute or extradite. We saw that with Pinochet in certain circumstances. Now, the gateway of jurisdiction to the court is very clear. I don't have unlimited discretion. I work as a jurist, as a prosecutor, as an officer of the court within the parameters of the statute. And the entry points are, if there is a state party that has, as matter of sovereignty has voluntarily accepted the jurisdiction of the court. We have jurisdiction in relation to the allegations of crimes committed by the nationals of a state party. We can have a state that is not a state party that can refer a matter to the court relating to its own territory. And of course, there is the option of the Security Council as the primary pillar of the international architecture to refer a matter to the court, for the court to look into that, and for the prosecutor, for me to look into it in order to make a determination if there is evidence. So within those confines, absolutely we can look into matters, but we're as strong as the statute. I don't have my own police force. I have investigators and analysts and investigators and a whole panoply, forensic experts. But we don't have a police force. We need cooperation from states. I can't enter. I'm not a clandestine intelligence force. We don't enter a state's territory without the consent of a state. And in circumstances where we don't have access to that territory, we have different ways of trying to preserve evidence to ensure that the right of victims and survivors and the international community to justice is maintained by preserving and collecting evidence and seeing what it shows. And the key aspect, I think, to emphasize to the audience is the ICC is a court of last resort. The first paradigm is that states themselves should exercise their own sovereign jurisdiction. And only if a state is unwilling or unable should the office of the prosecutor or the court come into play. And I've said repeatedly, if states step up, we can very happily step out. But if states that are state parties to the court or in relation to matters that we have jurisdiction are unwilling or are unable to fulfill their international law obligations to ensure that the kind of crass crimes, the massive crimes that denote genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes, if we can't find this common ground, that in this 21st century we can come together on that platform to say, look, this is against every value of all parts of the world, whether it's from Qatar or Turkey or Saudi or UK or France or Germany or Latin America, that we have to come together as human beings by virtue of our individual value to work to eradicate these crimes by holding them accountable, not based on politics, but based upon something independent and impartial, which is the yardstick of the rule of law.
Forgive a slightly simplistic question. I'm sure folks in the audience will be curious to know what is the standard, what is the standard of crime, what is what kind of crime, when does a terrorist act rise to the standard that it should bring in the interest of the International Criminal Court and your office? I mean, does it have to be a transnational terrorist group? Does a certain number of people have to be killed in order for it to rise to the level where it merits your attention?
Yes, a great question. No, it doesn't need to be transnational. The example is in Mali.
Yes.
In Mali, Ansar Dine, crimes were committed in Timbuktu, leading to the destruction by Ansar Dine, unfortunately in the name of Islam, of shrines and mosques that had been standing for hundreds of years, if not longer. The individual, Abdul al-Mahdi, came and he pleaded guilty. This was really acts of terrorism, but it was part of what was found to be a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. So as long as the gateway is clear of jurisdiction, a state party, a referral by a state, or the Security Council, amongst others, then the quality is the gravity and the scale of the offense and the ingredients. And unfortunately, terrorism is an ugly fact of life in every part of the world. There's no part that is immune from it. But different type of terrorism may not be part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. An Oklahoma bombing, for example, for the sake of argument, or a particular attack in one particular location is quantitatively and qualitatively quite different from Daesh. You know, there are numerous, probably uncountable terrorist acts against Yazidi, against Shia, against Sunni, against Kakai, against Shabak, and others, was of such a nature that we could find, and it was presented by me in my last report in my previous position as the special advisor and head of the UN team investigating Daesh, that constituted incitement to commit genocide against the Shia community and acts of genocide against the Yazidis. So in a way, it's very clear in terms of what can come before the court in terms of the law, because the law is clear. Incitement to commit genocide. We need to show an intention by the suspect, by the perpetrator, to destroy a group in whole or in part. It is the intent to eradicate that is key, and for crimes against humanity, it's the widespread or systematic nature.
I'm glad you brought up your previous experience in Iraq. Can you, to those who are not familiar, can you tell us a little bit of what the purpose of UNITAD was and how you feel that exercise went, and then what you learned in the process of that entire exercise that informs the way you think of your job now?
Well, I think it was a tremendous act of nimbleness, pragmatism, and principle by the Security Council in September 2017 to unanimously pass Resolution 2379 to create the UN team to investigate Daesh. And Iraq deserves very significant applause and acknowledgement, because this was not a case of the Security Council imposing accountability on a country that was reluctant. It was a partnership. It was Iraq who had suffered so deeply. The civilian population had paid a very heavy price, as well as the security services, to confront and then territorially defeat Daesh. And the Council resolution says it all. It is to ensure the rights to victims to justice, the rights of survivors, but also I think it's really important to understand that the ICC is not some kind of kumbaya court railing against the wind, seeking a utopian world of a better tomorrow in a way that is disconnected with the realities of today. Here we have the Global Security Forum. There's a recognition that security requires peace, and peace requires security. And the Council in black and white in that resolution stated that an additional advantage for the rule of law is to expose the violent extremism of Daesh. I think this is critical, because when we see, I'm a Muslim, when we see a religion whose name is peace, when Surah Al-Baqarah in the Holy Quran in the 2nd chapter proclaims La ikraha fid din, that there is no compulsion in the religion, we have to stand firm. We, as the community of the world, but Muslims in particular, we should be in the first row to say, not in our name. You cannot hijack a religion whose name is peace and contort it to kill people in the name of that religion. And because the contorted un-Islamic ideology is gaining traction for myriad reasons, injustices, perceived injustices, economic, societal, lack of education, many other factors, bad governance on occasion, on many occasions, we need to put a spotlight on it. Because the simple reality in many parts of the world, access to education is not a right that is achieved in practice. And many are misled by individuals who hold the Quran in the same way that hundreds of years ago and even today people were misled in the Crusades and elsewhere about what the beautiful message of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, about love thy neighbor like thyself and turn the other cheek. In that message, we saw so many crimes committed in the name of Christendom. We see crimes committed in the name of the peaceful religion of Buddhism. In Myanmar, we see Hindu extremism. It's proliferating in every part of the world. And if we're going to get ahead, kinetic measures alone don't work. This is why the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS made a very sensible and principled finding that accountability was part of the rubric of defeating Daesh. And I think we need to learn and realize and grasp more vividly the lesson of Nuremberg. In the rubble of Dresden and in Nuremberg, when fascism committed so many crimes against so many people in the world, the determination to have the rule of law prevail was one of the key steps that allowed the poison of National Socialism to be drawn from the German people. It was creating a record in which people could not deny the Holocaust. And if they denied the Holocaust, they would be viewed as either deranged or extremely dangerous. The same lesson that applied 75 years ago in Nuremberg, in my respectful view, applies today. That if we can, in addition to many other measures, the rule of law will not solve the world's problems by itself, but it plays a role. It can have an effective role within certain confines if we are managing expectations and working to release its latent potential. Because in confronting violent extremism, for sake of argument, or any types of crimes, you also manage to expose the ideology, which may not affect the hard nuts, the people that are so far gone, that their rabid hatred has permeated so deeply into the heart. But for the mass of people, they will step back because they will see this is not our religion. It is not our message. It is not our humanity to do this. And in the process of that exercise, I think it can help confront radicalization. And in Iraq, I said it very openly, Iraq needs its Nuremberg moment. I don't mean an international court. Justice is best delivered at home. But fair processes based upon evidence, not confessions that could be questioned, prevent later on the propaganda machines of these terrorist organizations like Daesh from presenting that they themselves are victims when they have actually committed such egregious violations. So I think this needs to be seen as an interlacing, interconnected pieces of architecture that together can help justice in its wider sense, outside of the court as well, start deepening in a way that is to the advantage of everybody.
But you invoke the Nuremberg principles, and they are sort of inspiring principles all these years later. But if you don't mind, if I put it to you this way, that the Nuremberg principles by themselves might not have meant very much if the trials hadn't taken place. Yeah. If the people responsible for those hideous crimes had not been actually brought to justice, be seen to be brought to justice, and then wound up in jail or suffered for the penalties for their crimes. But here there is a risk, is there not, that we're talking about a principle and we're not yet clear how we apply those principles. When you in Iraq, you obviously through the investigations you have a clear idea about who is responsible, down to individuals, of those sort of hideous acts of genocide against the Yazidis, the Tikrit air base. If those people are not actually brought before a court of law and prosecuted, will the principle have the same effect?
There has to be effective justice. The forum, for me, is not important. In fairness to Iraq, there's a lot of trials.
Yes.
That's not the issue. The issue is, are we conducting trials in a way that is seen to be independent and impartial, and then releases what I've called this latent potential of the law to create a record, to confront extremism, to show the heroism. I mean, we've got wonderful stories of Sunni saving a Shia member saving a Christian. That can also be the beginnings of bringing people together as well after these deep wounds have been carved in the soul of a country. And this is why I mentioned that the move from a confession-based system to evidence-based trials is important. It's not because states care at all about a gold star from Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International. My advice is not based upon that. It's based upon the interests of justice and trying to explain to states why it is a powerful instrument in terms of the heroism of a country, of a people, and actually bringing people together again. It is identifying, like the stage, some common ground where we can sit together. An example in Daesh, we initiated with His Excellency Adama Dieng, the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, fora with religious leaders. Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani, his leadership was fabulous. Cardinal Sacco, the Yazidi communities coming together to say, on this issue of our basic humanity, not only the Ahl Kitab, the Abrahamic faiths, but also all of our humanity, even people who don't believe in God, that is something that we can come to consensus about and then to move forward. And I think this is, there was quite some progress. There's a wonderful Chief Justice in Iraq, the President in Iraq, the Kurdish regional government. They were on the cusp, in fact, the KRG, of signing a law that would allow Iraq to domesticate international crimes. I know those discussions will be carried on by my successor. And I think if Iraq, as a matter of its own sovereignty, decides to do that, my honest and sincere view as somebody who loves Iraq, who has lived in Iraq, is this is very advantageous for Iraq and its standing and her people. But the simple reality is, because of Saddam Hussein, because of the occupation in Iraq, the rule of law has not been seen.
Yes.
It hasn't been demonstrated. So once it is demonstrated, I think hopefully they will see that it can be rolled out in a wider way that makes the country stronger.
But with Daesh, so much of so many of the crimes committed by that group, the genocidal activities, were not in Iraq, were in Syria. So you have this sort of two-headed situation where in Iraq there is a process in place to prosecute, whereas in Syria there clearly isn't. And that also sends a message to the international community, to neutral parties, that justice has been done selectively, does it not?
Well, it's a very great credit of Iraq,
yes,
that it wishes to have some kind of accountability. In terms of allegations in any other part of the world, as I mentioned, under the Rome Statute, the court has jurisdiction if crimes reach that, have that quality and have that gravity, even in Syria, if they're committed by nationals of state parties. The Security Council also could play a role. But one also can't be naive. At every moment in history, from going back millennia, but throughout humanity's existence, from the time of Prophet Adam, man thinks that we are at the apex of civilization. We are a work in progress. And perfect very often is the enemy of best. So one needs to keep, without saying, okay, everything's hopeless, because there are these gaps, there are these contradictions. Let's not have any law at all. That is a recipe that is going to freeze, to stagnate the progress of civilization. What we've seen, after Nuremberg, 75 years, there was international justice was put in the deep freezer. And yet you look what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall: Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Cambodia, Special Court for Sierra Leone, Special Tribunal for Lebanon, of course, a little bit different, the ICC. But increasingly, look at Pinochet, look at Daesh, look at Germany, France, Finland. They're exercising universal jurisdiction, and I think that's the key. These type of mass crimes cannot be done by nation states alone. That cannot be done certainly by the ICC alone. We need to be having these partnerships. with the situation country, with international organizations and courts like the ICC, and with other states that have the capacity and willingness that we can share evidence with, so we collectively share the heavy burden to ensure that the space for impunity is narrowed. It may not be obliterated in my lifetime, even yours because you're younger, but it may be narrowed, and if it's narrowed, I think that's something very positive to be applauded, but it won't come by these wonderful, fireside chats without a fire. It requires decision makers, policy makers, to see the potential of the rule of law and to not see it as some kind of, as I've said, some soft human rights principle that is divorced and separate from the security, stability, even economic development aspects that rightfully are also very important considerations for states. They are part of the same drive forward.
Well, let's turn now to the 800-pound gorilla in the forum. Practically every session yesterday and already this morning, we've heard talk of Afghanistan. And since we're talking about accountability for enormous and grave crimes, how do you attach accountability or impose accountability in a situation that we see now in Afghanistan, where the government itself is run by those very people that many people, I think, would agree should be on the dock. You should be prosecuting some of these people, and they are in government. And what are the prospects of justice being done there?
Well, Afghanistan is a state party, so yes. We have clear jurisdiction. Under my predecessor, an application was filed, and yes, we had authorization to proceed. The government of Afghanistan had filed an application to defer because they said that they were willing and able to prosecute. And as I've mentioned, under the principle of complementarity, the states have the first right, and we should not find ways to take jurisdiction away. If states step up, the court would step out. I filed an application after the de facto change in control with the Taliban there for permission to continue to investigate, particularly with a focus to the crimes of Daesh, ISIS, Khorasan, and the Taliban. Now, what we see, these cases, even in countries where we have access, where there is relative greater security, are not easy. We're not in the crime scene very often, and the cases are difficult. It's very difficult for witnesses and victims because our responsibility to them comes first.
Yes.
But what we see from Nuremberg, what we see from domestic courts, is that, look at Cambodia, where still the court there is still looking at crimes from the 1975 and Pol Pot. Mm-hmm. There is a Nuremberg principle that there is no statute of limitation for war crimes. So evidence can be collected, and I think the crimes of the nature of attacking children, of attacking women, rapes that we saw in Iraq, but the crimes of that are of this scale and gravity, I think it's in the interest of the law. It is morally right, it is legally required in my view, but also it's in the interest, I think, of every functioning state or authority to address those types of crimes. And I think, however difficult it is, and it's not going to be a walk in the park, is that we can find ways to increase the prospect of having accountability. But if you don't try to devote the resources to it, you have no chance whatsoever.
There are members of the negotiating team of the Taliban in this city right now, possibly in this hotel even. If you had the opportunity to speak with them directly, what would be your message to them? What would be your argument to persuade them to participate in, cooperate with the ICC, with your office?
Well, the first thing is the court and my office, we're not political. We're not trying to impose any one form of government. We're not trying to impose a political view. I have no interest in either regime change or in who's occupying a particular seat. The issue is for these category of crimes, which are contrary to international law, and are also contrary to the Rome Statute, action has to be taken. And it's in their interest, if any country that wants sovereignty, step up. And if you do your job, if you do what is required under international law, you can prosecute, you can investigate it. But what you can't do is use the shield of sovereignty as a, as a shield to perpetuate further acts of crimes, to support them, or to fail to take action to repress them. And the other argument to any state, not just Afghanistan, is there is this link between stability, security, investment, progress, standing in the world, that countries, all things being equal, that have better law and order, that have more functioning judiciaries, less corrupt, more professional police officers and investigators, tend to be better magnets for inward investment and development, which of course in most countries is a factor for the decision makers, because it may lead to more support and popularity and progress of the people. So there is that side as well. But there is an issue with some actors also regarding the ideology. And this goes back to a very clear position. Some acts, the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said very clearly that an individual who educates his daughters will go to paradise, will go to Jannah. He told Muslims, learn Islam from Hazrat Aisha. This is the religion of Islam that is completely against people who say women should not be educated, who target or persecute women for no other reason for their gender. The Holy Quran says men are garments for women, and women are garments for men, for their husbands. So this common ground is one also, both the Organization for the Islamic Conference, the Arab League and others should come and say, these are the values of all of us, not just the Muslim, not just the rest of the world. Islam is part of that world. And this is the idea of a narrative and understanding of finding the common ground of basic norms. And I think this is also an important lesson for me. The Rome Statute is not the law of Italy. The Rome Statute created the ICC. We deal with Geneva Conventions. We're not dealing with the law of Switzerland or the Hague Conventions. It's not the law of the Netherlands. These laws go back to Cyrus the Great. It goes back to Salahuddin in terms of chivalry that came into the development of the laws of war. So we need to make clear, and I said it when I was sworn in on the 16th of June, that I'm not in the export business. I'm not trying to export a product so Qatar buys it or another country buys it. We need to show that these are the cultural, legal products that came from this soil. And it's this soil, whether it's Qatar or whether I'm talking to Asia or Latin America, because these are basic principles. Who is supporting slavery in the 21st century? Who is supporting sex slavery? Who is saying that you can give a 2-year-old a gun to execute somebody in the head? Under which philosophy in the annals of depravity can you burn people alive or drown people on a cage that we have from Daesh, and you video it like it is something to be applauded? Not in my name, not in the name of Islam, not in the name of humanity. And this goes whether one is dealing with Rohingya in Myanmar, dealing with with Daesh or ISIS in Afghanistan. This is something where members in this room, the men and women in this room, those that are watching, we need to not be bystanders, spectators on some Hollywood production as we see people blown to bits. We need to come together by these core values, because if we don't, it is not just the economic issues that suffer, it's not just security. What are we leaving to our children? We have a lot of talk about the environment. This battle of values and commonality of values is just as important to the future of humanity, in my view.
You've anticipated a little bit what will have to be, I think, my last question, but I'd like you to expand on it. You've now been chief prosecutor for 100 days, give or take. Tell me a little bit more about how you propose, what you bring of yourself, of Karim Khan, to this role, and how that informs the way you think about the role, and how you think that will make the role different from how it has been performed before. And follow-up to that is that what have you learned in the 100 days? Have you had to adjust your expectations one way or the other for the role?
Yes, it's a fascinating question. I mean, I'm a very simple person. I'm just a lawyer. I'm not a diplomat, and I tend to speak very directly. My mother is born and bred in Yorkshire. She's a Muslim. I'm an Ahmadi Muslim. My father was a Pathan from Pakistan, and so by culture, by being brought up, I tend to speak very directly, and I think that whatever mistakes I will make, that sincerity of speaking honestly, trying my best to keep my word, let my word be my bond, is important as a lawyer, because one can't be Janus-faced about different issues. I think the office has been there for almost 20 years. 2002, the Rome Statute came into force, and there are big challenges. The court has overextended itself. The office has overextended itself beyond its resources. We're not an NGO. We're not a legal wing of an NGO. We have partnerships with wonderful NGOs, but we have to realize that the burden of proof is a heavy one, and to get the results that victims deserve, to actually have effective prosecutions, the results should be determined by the judges based upon the evidence. Probably we need to focus and go deeper, because we don't have infinite resources. You know, at the moment we're doing budget discussions, so the office needs to refocus, and of course there's certain management issues in the office in terms of the workplace culture and other issues that we faced. And going back to one of the things I've done, you know, this is also not a common law court, nor is it even a civil law court. I've appointed for the first time a wonderful woman lawyer from Harvard, Professor Intizar Rab, as the first special advisor on Islamic law. Because again, it's like finding that common ground that any person in the world, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Europe, from Eastern Europe, or from Latin America, should see their culture, their values, their traditions in the court. Yes. And only if we show that this is the shared heritage of humanity will people have confidence in it, and will we be able to reach out and be effective and move the dial in a way that the office we leave is better than the office I've inherited, and there is more justice when I leave than when I came. And that doesn't mean it all has to be done in The Hague. It can be these partnerships, and indeed it should be these partnerships with states coming up and standing up in an ever more effective manner.
Thank you so much. More power to you. Ladies and gentlemen, Karim Khan QC.
Thank you so much.